Welcome back to Better Data in 5. This video covers Part B of Formative Data for Classroom Instruction. Last time, we introduced you to this potential 4-step process for creating and utilizing formative assessments. We already covered Step 1, creating your assessments, and today we're going to be talking about Steps 2, 3, and 4, pretest, analyze, and next steps. As we go through the video, I also want to challenge you to think about the Ohio OIP or improvement process. This cycle goes really well with this 4-step process. You'll see that different steps can sometimes change from what part of the cycle they're in. Pretest is going to give you some of that initial identifying your needs of students. Analyzing is going to help you plan for any potential reteaching, and it will also help you implement and monitor. Next steps are examining, reflecting, adjusting, and then back to identifying critical needs. Pretest. Know where your students are starting from. Pretesting can give you all sorts of valuable information. A pretest might tell you that you need to reteach prerequisite knowledge. It might help you understand that you can actually skip or shorten some lessons. Maybe a 45-minute lesson can be a 10-minute review. It can also help you think about how to actually instruct your students. So last video, we talked about John Hattie and some ways that you can enhance student learning. 2 ways you might be able to enhance student learning based on your pretest is grouping. Homogeneous groups might help students work together on similar goals. It can be a way for you to differentiate for different students. And effects of peer learning tend to have an effect of 0.52. Remember, 0.4 is an average year's worth of growth. So going to 0.52 is accelerating student learning. Heterogeneous groups can allow students to tutor or help one another. And tutoring has an effect size around 0.54. Either way, you want to generally think about your grouping and potentially change it up throughout a lesson or throughout a year. Then we want to analyze, and we want to have a plan for how we're going to analyze this data that we're collecting. What kind of data do you want to analyze daily, weekly, monthly, even quarterly or annually? And who will you analyze this data with? Teachers tend to be more effective when they work together. So it's fine to analyze some data alone, but think about who else can help you. Is it your co-teacher? What kind of data would be appropriate to take to a TBT or another small group of teachers? What kind of data do you want to go over with an educational coach, your administrators? Maybe bring to a BLT or a DLT. And finally, next steps. Again, in the last video, we introduced you to this quote: where am I going, how am I going, and where to next? Where am I going? That might be your pretesting. How am I going? That's probably your formative assessment and analyzing it. Where to next is how we're going to reteach, or can we move on? So when you're analyzing an assessment, think about what your cutoff is going to be. What are you hoping that your students are going to achieve? What's your target? At the end of a self-contained unit, you might be happy if 80% of your students met 80% of the standards. But there might be a specific skill where you need each individual student to master that before you can allow them to go on to the next lesson. If your students met the target you set, or if they just grew tremendously from where they started from, take a moment to reflect on what went well and what you might want to use again in future lessons. If students didn't meet all of the targets, look for ways to change your teaching strategies in the future. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So, depending on who did or didn't meet your target, tells us what kind of tier issue we're dealing with. If many students, generally 20% or more, did not master a specific objective, then you have a tier 1 issue. You're going to want to reteach this information. So think about how you're going to reteach it. More of the same probably isn't going to work. Now, if there was some crazy interruption to your lesson, a bunch of snow days, a lot of student absences, then maybe a little extra spaced practice and a review is going to be just fine. But there are other things we want to think about too. Could students who have already mastered the content help others develop their understanding? Did you present the initial information in multiple ways? Did you think about a universal design for learning, or could you improve upon it when reteaching? Could the content be tied back to something the students already know? And finally, when are you going to retest to understand if your students met the target after you retaught it? Tier 2 would refer to students who didn't improve after Tier 1 interventions, and hopefully this should be less than 20% of your students. When you're thinking about Tier 2 students, think about how you're going to give that intervention. Does everyone get the same intervention to start with? How long are you going to let that intervention go for? And some possible examples might be flashcards, computer modules, or tutoring. Again, retest after the intervention. And finally, Tier 3, if students didn't make adequate progress after the Tier 2 interventions, these are your Tier 3 students who might need more individualized one-on-one attention. No matter what kind of intervention you're getting, please always retest to make sure your students actually got to where you needed them to be. So, how can we help you? What other topics would you like us to cover in future videos? What are the needs of your district? And again, your State Support Team 16 data team is Julie Bays, Kate Silver, and I'm Jenny Lang. If you would like a copy of this slide deck, just go to that QR code right down there, and you can click on it and have your own copy. Thank you for listening. Bye.